to talk about being at the LJ game. What are your memories being in the game? I mean, obviously, hearing the stadium erupt and being there, it's probably one of these once-in-a-lifetime experiences. But do you remember anything before that play, throughout the game, your thoughts and, anything like that?
Chris Childs was the Knick point guard. He and Charlie Ward played together, and Childs was very up and down. He was much stronger than Ward, but he wasn't nearly as solid a player. He had a really good game that day. The Pacers had the Davis brothers, and they hated Reggie Miller, who just constantly killed the Knicks with big shots. There were just a lot of big personalities on the court, and a lot of big plays made by everybody. Allen Houston. It was just a great era in professional basketball in New York. I mean, the '90s were just, as a Knick fan, it was just as good as it gets.
Did you get a good view of the 4-point play in the sense of, could you see whether, that was definitely a foul, or maybe it wasn't?
I think it was Anthony Davis who got caught on LJ in a switch, and he reached in. Could you see whether he hit his arm? I mean, obviously, you know where my seats are, about 10 to 15 rows behind the Knick bench towards the corner. The play was on the left side, so it was kind of in front of me, but down the other end of the court. Could I tell he fouled him or not? No. Could I tell the ball was going in the basket when it was up in the air? It looked awfully pretty.
I love that. Love that. Let's get into our lightning round of questions, although it's not so quick.
I noticed it's not so lightning as it is a round.
It's more of just a round. It's not a lightning round. It's just a round of questions.
I think it needs to be renamed, Jeff.
It definitely does. 5 episodes in, I need to rename it. My idea was originally it was going to be like Bill Pinto's halftime 150, and it's nothing like that. So,
well, fire away.
Okay, who's your favorite Knick? Anybody in the organization, player, coach, anybody?
Current or historic?
Any player, current or historic, any player.
I love Bernard King, and I think that the Knicks had a chance to win a championship in the late 80s if he hadn't tore his knee up. I thought that was just a devastating direction for the franchise when that happened. I was watching that game. I think it was against the Kansas City Omaha Kings. I think Reggie Theus was on the court, and it was just he might have been the best player in the league at that point.
Definitely.
With Bird and Johnson, he was that good. And then, obviously, he came back, and it was a remarkable comeback, but he was never the player that he was.
I've thought about this a lot, and, God, everyone remembers, when you think about 80s NBA basketball, you think of the Celtics, you think of the Lakers, 76ers maybe Michael Jordan and the Bulls. Nobody remembers the 80s Knicks. It's like, but Benard King was that good of a player. He just elevated himself. And we talked last week on the podcast, Jay said Benard King was the player where he just felt like he was on a different shelf above every other player he ever saw play. Was Benard like that with you?
Absolutely. And the game that stands out most for me was the first round series against Isaiah Thomas and the Pistons. It was a young Isaiah, and it was an absolute war of a series. Kelly Tripucka was in that team, Lambeer, and they ended up playing Game 5, not in the Silverdome where the Pistons were playing, but at Cobo Arena. And that was the game that Isaiah scored 15 points in the last 90 seconds of the game to send it to OT before fouling out in OT. And Benard had like a common 44. In those days, 44 for Benard was what you expected.
Right.
And it was just a spectacular effort for two Hall of Fame athletes going at it in their prime. And it was just a remarkable game and a remarkable effort. I still watch that game anytime it'll come on. If I see it on one of the NBA, on the NBA channel or ESPN Classics, it was just one of the most remarkable sporting events I've ever seen. And that was Benard at his finest, just lifting the Knicks against what would be a two-time NBA champion Pistons just a few years later.
Is there a player in today's NBA that's anything like Benard where you look at him and go, man, they elevate their game just like Benard did with the Knicks?
I mean, obviously LeBron is just a remarkable player, and the debate about whether it's LeBron or MJ is a fun debate to have. There are no right answers or wrong answers, but what he's been able to accomplish in his careers has just been nothing short of remarkable.
Is there any player, Benard at his finest, would you think he's better or at least comparable to guys in today's NBA like Harden or Anthony Davis when they're at their finest, when they're at their best?
Benard in a lot of ways, I think the Anthony Davis comparison is a good one because Davis is like too quick for the big guys and too big for the small guys, and that's the way Benard was. He would just muscle the smaller guys. I remember just eating Kelly Tripucka for lunch in that series, and then the next series, Kevin McHale was one of the best defensive players in the league. Benard was just too quick for him. I mean, the Knicks took the Celtics who won the championship. The Knicks took him 7. They didn't play too many competitive games at the Garden, but Benard, I think, had 40 in all the games at Madison Square Garden and was just absolutely brilliant. So that type of mismatch that a player creates when he's either too strong or too fast, combination of those things, that reminds me a little bit of Anthony Davis.
Right. And I got to see that firsthand, on Friday when the Knicks played the Pelicans, and it just...
Oh, did he torch us?
God. And it was the type of thing where he got the ball, every jumper, you knew it was going in. The minute it left the second it left his hand, it's going in. And it's just...
that was the type of game that really made me miss an Anthony Mason or a Charles Oakley, because
someone was
Davis had just free reign to go anywhere he wanted, and somebody should have knocked him down at some point. And maybe it would have been a flagrant foul, but the message should have been clear, which is, we're going to stand in your way. And you may beat us, but you're not going to run over us. And I never got that feeling from the Knicks that night, and he ran over us ultimately.
And if you think about who our most physical player on the team is, it's probably Noah Vonleh, who really isn't all that physical, especially not in the sense that Oakley or Mason was. And I think it's hard to find a player in the NBA who is like Mason and Oakley in that kind of physicality way. Maybe Steven Adams is the best.
It doesn't exist anymore. I would argue our most physical player is Enes Kanter. But obviously he just doesn't have the foot speed to play against Davis, and that's why he played so few minutes the other night.
Yeah.
But go in there and be physical. Push him around. I mean, I watched Nikola Jokic play him the next night, and Jokic played him much more physically.
Yeah, we don't have those physical players anymore.
No, they've really legislated that part of the game out. It's just not played that way anymore.
It's really just such a shame.
It's unbelievable when the refs go under the hood to determine what's a flagrant foul, and when they come out and it's like flagrant, you're like, really? That was a flagrant foul? Right. What are you looking at?
Right.
But that's a common occurrence in the modern NBA. And look, it's a lot of fun to watch these guys run up and down the court and score 125, 130 points. So I think more people like that. You and I may be fans of the grinded-out 87, 85 game where every hoop is valuable, but that's not the product the NBA has decided to put on display.
You know what? It's fun. It's fun when you have like one or two teams in the league who play like that. Like in the early 90s, the Warriors team.
Yep.
Right, like that team was fun because it was so different than every other team. But when every team does it, you're looking at two teams playing the same way, and it's like, well, which team's going to play it better? And that's not as much fun as seeing two different styles of basketball going at it.
Yeah, no question. But the league is constantly evolving. Things are constantly changing. And what's popular in today's game may not be popular in the game in 10 years.
One last question about Benard, because his injury kind of is what led us to Patrick Ewing.
I think they were already going to be in the lottery that year. I mean, they had a dismal season, and he got hurt in late March. And I think they were getting Ewing anyway, which was the thing that made me so sad, because if you had combined Ewing with a healthy Bernard King from the mid-'80s, that would have been a load. Do
you think that team, a young Ewing with Benard at his prime, uninjured, do you think that team beats the late 80s Pistons or the Showtime Lakers or the 80s Celtics?
Certainly possible. And we'll never know, because they've added a piece or two at that point, where they've been a 55-win team with two great players on the roster, and then they could have supplemented. Would you have gotten more out of the other guys that were on the roster? Would Gerald Wilkins have been a better player, combined with Bernard King? Would that have taken some of the pressure and load off of him? You know, those are the questions sports fans ask themselves all the time, and you never know the answer to.
You know, I asked you that question. I was really hoping you'd give me a definite answer, because it's like
I'm
yes, searching for that answer. It's like I want someone to tell me yes or no, but we'll just never know.
Well, they would have had two of the best five players in the league at that point, so
yeah,
that would have been a heck of a roster to build around, and that's why I think that team could have competed for championships.
And those other maybe three players in that top five: Jordan, Bird, Magic, maybe Isaiah.
Yeah, Hakeem was part of that list too.
Right, Hakeem. Yeah.
A lot of great
on
players
different teams, and none of them would ever team up together. That's the other thing I can't stand about today's NBA.
Yeah, the players are in charge. I mean, it's a different generation.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's better or it's worse. It just is.
All right. So, question 2 on this round is who is your least favorite?
Oh, this is going too fast. We're up to question 2 already.
I know, right?
Slow down. Just slow down for me.
Question 2, topic 2 in this round. Who is your least favorite Knick? The guy you just hated to root for?
Gosh, nobody really comes to mind. I mean, I was just always such a big Knick fan that I can't say there was somebody I didn't want to root for if he was on the team. I mean, right now I guess it'd be Joakim Noah because that contract is such an albatross around our necks.
Right.
But I got nobody else that really comes to mind.
Joakim Noah's a good answer. He's never done anything for this team, and we paid him so much, and he's the guy that's preventing us from getting a max free agent potentially.
I think they do have room for one max free agent this year. I know Cantor goes off the books too, so that should help him a lot.
Do you not dislike Noah, or is it more of you dislike Phil Jackson, who gave him that contract?
Well, clearly Jackson was the one who made the decision, as he was just a horrible general manager for us. Everybody thought he was the savior when he came in, and he was a disaster.
And how many times have we thought that with guys like Isaiah Thomas when he came in?
You know what? I'm going to go with Phil Jackson as my least favorite Knick, because I never liked Phil when he was coaching the Lakers or the Bulls. He was always so arrogant, and I hated his manipulative comments in the newspapers. So I'm going to go with Phil Jackson as my least favorite Knick.
Did you dislike Phil when he was a player at all?
I was pretty young at that point. He missed the championship season, 69-70. I think he had back surgery and missed the entire season. He was such an awkward-looking player. There was never nothing graceful about him. It looked like he had like a clothes hanger for shoulders. I mean, they just kind of stuck out.
I remember talking to my dad about, because honestly, for the longest time, I thought you and my dad were the same age, and you're a bit younger.
Your dad was kind of my big brother. I mean, he took me to games when I was young.
Right, and so...
In a lot of ways, he was my older brother.
Right, and that's such a special relationship to have. And so when I found out that there was like a 7-8 year difference, and I think I asked him whether you remembered or would remember the early 70 Knicks, or maybe more the 80 Knicks since you were younger, but do you remember going to any like early 70s or mid-70 games?
Yeah, I went to a lot of games in the mid-70s. I remember my family had season tickets in 73, 74, so I was 12, 13 years old, and I went to a bunch of games.
How old were you when you went to games with Knick games with my dad?
I think 12, 13.
Wow.
I mean, I hung out with your dad and his whole crew at Shelter Rock in those days. I was a little kid kind of following him around.
Yeah, Shelter Rock and Manhasset.
No, it's great memories. And I was always on your dad's team.
Yeah. Anytime you guys played...
basketball, I was always on your dad's team, and I was always the extra guy. And your dad liked to win, so he always knew just how to utilize me.
My dad hated to lose. He didn't like to win. He hated to lose.
Hated to lose.
He would get so mad whenever a ref made a bad call. Like I always called it the dad vein. Like a vein would pop out of his forehead. And he would get so red.
Yeah, I remember that.
All right, let's get into question 3 of 5. Give me your favorite once a Knick, always a Knick player. That player that's obscure, random player. Maybe he was only on the team for 1 year. Maybe 12th guy off the bench. Maybe just a really good player before a short amount of time. Just a guy who doesn't have his name hanging in the rafters. Not Benard King, not Carmelo Anthony, not John Starks. Give me your favorite once a Knick, always a Knick player.
Ray Williams.
Ray Williams. Why Ray?
Love Ray Williams from the 70s. Gus Williams' younger brother. Really talented physically. Wasn't a great era from the Knicks. He and Michael Ray Richardson kind of comprised the backcourt for a few years. Both really talented athletes. The league was really struggling in the late 70s. All the cocaine rumors and all the problems the league had. And I remember watching Ray Williams and really loving his game and loving his abilities. I should say the late Ray Williams. I think he's dead now.
Is he? Yeah, he is. He is. But he, it's so funny because those late 70s Knicks, I feel like is a pocket of Knicks history that nobody ever talks about. But they had some great players. Michael Ray Richardson was, I would love if he were on this team. He's kind of like a do-it-all kind of player. We had Bob McAdoo. I spoke about that in the last podcast, the last episode.
I've played some tennis with McAdoo's son.
Yeah?
Who's a real good tennis player out of living in Jersey.
That's so funny.
I told him how much I love watching his dad play.
That's amazing. Yeah, Ray Williams, and he was that two-guard. He was in that backcourt with Michael Ray Richardson, who just...
Yeah, I think they drafted Williams like late 70s, a little bit later in the draft, and I think Richardson was like out of Montana, like the 4th pick in 78 or 79.
Yeah.
And that was just a fun team. And Williams wasn't with the Knicks very long. I think he was only with them 4 or 5 years. He kicked around the league after that.
That's a long time. I mean, I feel like the more I do research on guys who play with the Knicks, it's like guys like Bob McAdoo play like 2 years, 2.5 years.
He was a big star with the Buffalo Braves. That's where he really had his coming out.
Yeah, and then, we've had a lot of really good players, and we only have them for a year or two.